Good morning, everyone. My name is Lisa Millman, and I am a specialist at the Parent Resource Center. And I want to welcome you to our sixth installment of our behavior intervention series on executive functioning. Today, we're going to be focusing on tips to see an increase in following directions at home of your children. Today, presenting will be Rachel Perella and Lori Creighton. So ladies, welcome.
Good morning, everyone. I am Rachel Perella and so happy to be here for our makeup session. We're not going to let that snow keep us from our learning, and I appreciate you being here today. And I also have my colleague with me who is going to introduce herself.
Good morning. I'm Lori Creighton, and I am also with Behavior Intervention Services, and I'm just thrilled to be here with all of you this morning. Thanks for joining us.
This presentation was created to address the needs of both older and younger students with varying abilities, and you know your student best. So we do invite you to connect the material in this presentation to the specific and unique needs of your student. All right, so thank you for participating. We're going to quickly go through our overview and outcomes for our presentation now. So during our training, parents and guardians will be provided with an overview of what we call instructional control, and parents and guardians will review strategies to support their students with following those directions. And by the end of this training, we hope that you'll be able to connect those executive function skills of working memory and goal-directed attention and focus, as well as instructional control to support your student with following directions. All right, so we include this slide each time we do a presentation because this is a journey and we are in it together. We want to remember that this process takes time and strategies, and that timeline is different for each and every learner. We want to approach the behavior change in a positive way, and one of the simplest ways we can do this is to catch our student when they are doing exactly what's expected or desired and sharing with them specifically why what they are doing is just so cool, amazing, wonderful, or expected. Consistency is also important, but let's be real. Consistency does not mean 100% perfect. It just means that even when it's hard to do, we're trying our best and probably trying again and trying again. And this is okay. And it is a natural part of the process because it does take time when we're talking about changing behavior. We also want to remember that behaviors are skills that can be taught. That's why we are here, why we have had 6 sessions this year with the Parent Resource Teacher, the Parent Resource Center, and just know that just like math or reading, we do this through teaching and providing feedback when it comes to behavior. So as soon as I'm finished with reading this slide, Lori is going to put up a poll for you. We want to check in with you on this thing called following directions. When you ask your student to follow a direction and they do not do it or do something else, which person are you? A poll will be coming up in a moment. Are you number 1? Oh, well. Are you number 2? Really? Are you number 3? I just can't stop the tears. Or number 4, I just can't. Let's go ahead and see those responses. I see them coming in. I get it with that really. Why can't you just follow my simple direction, right? I see some just can't stop the tears. Thank you so much for responding. I think Lori is sharing those responses with you right now. We have a variety of each. And yes, when those directions are not being followed, it can be frustrating. There's so much going on that we simply sometimes don't have time for our directions to not be followed. So we hope that this presentation provides you with some strategies to make the process run a bit more smoothly. And some of the strategies may take a little bit of front loading on our part, but the payoff is often well worth it. So let's do a quick review of those executive functions. So if we step back for a moment and recall those 6 executive function skills, I do want to point out that there was a behavior intervention services training back in May that is posted on the Parent Resource Center YouTube page, and it's called Supporting Executive Functions at Home. And we encourage you to watch that when you have time. Additionally, each of our monthly trainings thus far have had an executive functions focus, so be sure to catch those as time allows, also found on the PRC YouTube page. So our executive function skills begin to develop when children are very young, and this actually continues into our 20s. So the good news is that we can teach and develop these skills for many, many years. I actually have a college student who my husband and I are working with him on some of building some of those executive function strategies now that he's off on his own. So it's important to note that executive function skills do work in tandem with each other, and just keeping in mind that no executive function skill is necessarily working alone. We do tend to see some consistency with self-control being embedded in all of the executive functions, and we have addressed that in earlier trainings, and we'll talk a little bit about that today. So looking at metacognition, this is the ability to analyze, understand, and monitor one's own thinking and learning. So examples of that might be when your student has homework in several core classes or a variety of homework assignments, and being able to prioritize that assignment, what needs to be completed first, and developing a plan for that. And then being able to evaluate whether or not that strategy worked. When we're looking at working memory, this is our ability to store, retrieve, and use information for a task, such as relating one idea to another. So we are going to be talking deeper about working memory today. So holding, say, a person's address in mind while listening to instructions about how to get there, remembering directions that have been given from a caregiver is also an area in which working memory plays a role. Goal-directed persistence is our ability to start those tasks, to initiate, plan, and organize our time and materials, and solve problems and sustain effort for follow-through. So setting those reasonable short and long-term goals, long-term project planning and follow-through, planning a trip, say, and following through on those plans, packing, figuring out what activities might be that day or each day. Goal-directed attention and focus is the ability to filter out all those distractions. And this does come into play with that following directions. We'll be focusing, honing in on this particular executive function today as well, and sustaining that concentration in order to think and listen and watch with interest. So tuning out those distractions. This can be especially challenging right now in the virtual school environment, with the possibility of just so many activities going on in the home, or perhaps there are some preferred activities that look much more exciting and interesting than being on the computer for class. So that would fit in that category. Self-control is our ability to inhibit and regulate those emotional and behavioral responses and read and respond to those social situations. We see self-control embedded in all of the executive functions, and it's using those coping tools also to manage stress, those big emotions, and those worrisome feelings. And cognitive flexibility and shift. Examples of this, where we're trying to take perspective, make connection, think flexibly, adapt to change, and adjust to the unexpected. It might be adapting the fact that when I'm getting ready to have breakfast and there's no milk, and I really was looking forward to that cereal, being able to shift to having something different for breakfast. It could be a change in any type of plan, making a change based on another person's situation. Perhaps that may mean stopping to help a caregiver with some directions that they have given while the student is doing a preferred activity at the time. So that's our overview. We know that these executive functions don't work in isolation, and they're often collaborating in order to drive our actions. Today we're going to discuss, as mentioned before, working memory and goal-directed attention and focus, and how they relate to following directions. So please feel free at this time to refer to your participant guide on pages 1 and 2 to take notes on working memory and goal-directed attention and focus. As mentioned before, each month in our series, we've discussed specific executive functions to include self-control, cognitive flexibility and shift, goal-directed persistence, and metacognition. And we know that these executive functions are collaborating together, and there's crossover when it comes to those executive functions. Self-control is bedded within all of them. And again, we'll discuss how working memory and goal-directed attention play that significant role in our ability to follow directions. We're also going to dive a little deeper into some strategies that can be used to develop those working memory and goal-directed attention and focus executive functions. All right, so that working memory is our ability to store, retrieve, and use information for a task, such as relating one idea to another. It allows us to connect that past knowledge and make connections to prior information given or learned. We can then apply that information to our new situations. So when it comes to following directions, working memory plays a role in your student being able to actually remember what they were asked to do. Additionally, working memory skills support your student with remembering each of the steps of those directions. Have you ever noticed that you have given your student 3 things to do and they only do one of those tasks? Maybe they don't do any of them, but sometimes they just do one and you wonder, really? This may be an indication that your student may need to develop their working memory skills. If I ask my teenage daughter, to unload the dishwasher, pick up her clothes off the floor in the bathroom, and then feed the dogs. And the one direction in the list that she completes is feeding the dogs. It might be that the last thing I said was what she remembered. And if this is the case, because it could be something else, this could possibly be an example of further support being needed with that working memory. So when I say it might be something else, if we're thinking about those executive function skills overlapping, there could be a little bit of goal-directed attention and focus coming into play there. And one thing that might be keeping her focus on just the dogs is that we're fostering a puppy and she's highly motivated to feed her. So let's talk about some strategies that a caregiver can use to support teaching and learning those working memory skills. So we can use multisensory strategies. That's over on the right there. We can pair our verbal instructions with a visual. So on that top right is a visual that shares the steps to eating lunch. First, eat. Next, throw trash away. Next, wipe the table or desk. And last, throw away the wipe. So this visual helps to support that working memory area if the student needs that extra help. But you can begin to fade the first or last step of the process once the steps are regularly being followed with that visual. So you can see that the first step has been removed here. And the last three steps, the student still has that visual support. And then next you would remove the first two steps, and so on. Another strategy is using mnemonics, which are rhymes, chants, raps that could help your student with remembering information. The example on the left here helps us to remember where on a compass north, south, east, and west are. I had a problem with this when I was younger. The student would be taught the saying, never eat soggy waffles. And then next, the student would use the mnemonic to label the points of the compass clockwise with either the first letter or full word of the mnemonic to assist identifying the appropriate directions. Eventually, it's hoped that the student will say the mnemonic in their head and write the appropriate directional points. Next is games. There are many games that can be played to work on working memory. Challenging your student to do 3 actions after you've said them is a great practice, and it definitely can be a fun interaction between the caregiver and student if you're kind of going back and forth with it. So for example, show me jump, knock on the door, and sit in the chair. Other games might include having a friend or family member tell the student 3 things they did over the weekend, and the student repeating them back. Caregivers can also get creative and add to this with other options, such as 3 things you did when you first woke up, 3 steps to playing a favorite game. I think you get the idea. Repeating back the order of 4 numbers is also a way to practice working memory skills. You can use those larger numbers for teens. Taking picture cards and ordering them as a visual and then shuffling them and having the student respond by ordering them again works on that working memory. I wonder if any of you remember the game where the players sat in a circle and started at the beginning of the alphabet, and each of the players had to say a name and item they bought from the store. So perhaps my name is Andrea and I bought some apples, and the next player would have to say her name is Andrea and she bought some apples. My name is Brett and I bought some bologna. So that's another example. I really was not a fan of that because my working memory skills were not the greatest, but this is a way to help practice and strengthen those working memory skills. Other examples, Here's an example of another mnemonic. Kings play chess on fine glass sets. This is used in biology courses to help students remember the order of those taxonomic ranks: kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. You can also use these external storage systems such as calendars, lists, charts, and notes. I certainly cannot survive without my to-do lists and my calendar. Using multisensory strategies, again, here is a little bit older student using a multisensory strategy of pairing verbal instructions with a visual or walkthrough of steps with a caregiver of how to do laundry. Providing the same template for procedures and routines, something I see a lot of. If there are struggles with writing a paragraph, say, I have seen teachers create these templates for a simple paragraph, writing that topic sentence, the 3 supporting details, and that closing sentence. What you can do is fade that and pull out the prompt to write the topic sentence once the student is good with following that visual, so that when the student is asked to write a paragraph, they've practiced those steps both visually and then with that fading of each of the parts of that paragraph. So let's now look at the executive function skill of goal-directed attention and focus as it relates to our following directions. So this is our ability to filter out those distractions and sustain concentration in order to think, listen, and/or watch with interest. Activities in which goal-directed attention and focus would be needed could be getting ready to begin the day, the end-of-day routine, planning dinner or a recipe, planning homework, writing a paper, attending to a speaker or task. You all are using this executive function skill right now as you're listening to me and following along with the slides. Long-term projects, studying for tests, managing those tasks that require a great amount of effort. So here are some strategies to support goal-directed attention. And again, just like our other strategies, they can be presented in text, visually, or both. So on the left, I find this works really well with my teen, is a Post-it note with start time and stop time written on it. This strategy supports following those directions in that the student can see when is this going to end, right? If there is an end time to it. It may be a task, but when there's an end time, this is a great strategy. The goal is that the student's motivated to initiate because they know that there is an end time. When getting ready to ask your student to follow directions, it's important to minimize any distractions. So for example, when I ask my son to take out the garbage, I'm sure to shut off the TV first or have him close that book he's reading. We have an image there in the center of the slide, so he can focus on the direction being given. I also ask him to repeat those directions so I know I heard what was asked. On the right of your screen is a checklist of the steps to actually taking out the garbage. Yep, sometimes it needs to be broken down to this extent, and we call this a schedule within a schedule. So how many of you have given a direction and the way the task was completed was not quite what your expectations were? Taking out that garbage is part of the student's home schedule. However, and I see some agrees over there coming up. However, even though it's part of the student's schedule, it may need some clarification on how to complete the chore. So it may be empty the bathroom garbage, empty the kitchen garbage, empty the bedroom's garbage, and throw the garbage into the community trash bin. So as my student does each step, he's able to either check off his accomplishment or at the end say, hey, did I get all of these areas? So to add to this, please feel free to write these ideas down in your participant packet. Other ways to work on goal-directed attention and focus strategies could be developing a packing list for a trip, making a folding chore chart where the student can fold up or down when a task is completed. The caregiver could also assign a long-term task, such as building something together that will take a while to accomplish. And be sure to point out the sustained effort that is needed to accomplish these long tasks and provide praise intermittently as you see this effort. Timers can also be integrated into long-term tasks for breaks. So this also brings in the overlapping executive function skill of goal-directed persistence. And then also just daily talking about examples of people that maybe you and your student know, local stories about how maintaining focus for an extended period of time allowed the person to accomplish what they did. So now that we've discussed the executive functions needed in order to follow directions, let's talk about the process of following directions, as well as how to support our students with following directions. So learning about how to follow directions is a complex task. It doesn't seem complex to us, but it really is. And as we present information on this, please refer to your participant guide on page 3 to take some notes. Students are required to engage their working memory to remember what was asked, use goal-directed attention and focus to filter out distractions. They need to engage in cognitive flexibility and shift, especially if they were interrupted while doing a preferred task. And they need to use their goal-directed persistence skills to initiate following directions. Oftentimes as caregivers, we need to provide those explicit instructions on the direction, such as the example on how to take out the garbage. So we're going to point to 6 areas of focus when looking at the process for following directions. Does the student have the ability to perform the direction? When the direction was given, was it said in a way that was clear for the student? We also need to think about giving the direction as a statement versus a question. And when the direction is given, is the caregiver allowing their student a little time to process that direction? And then checking to make sure the student understands what is being asked and that we give praise and reinforcement for following that direction. I know it's a lot and we're all so busy, but this front loading really does pay off. So we can make sure that as the person giving that direction, everything's ready and set up for success. And that's what we mean on this slide by saying a mental checklist or even a visual checklist for ourselves, if it's a large task, to make sure that we have everything set up. So think about that direction you want to give. And does your student have what they need to perform that direction? A co-worker provided an example of asking her daughter to help her unload the top rack of the dishwasher. Well, her daughter was not quite tall enough to reach everything in that top rack all the way back. And just simply showing her daughter how to bring a stool over solved that problem. If the caregiver is asking their student to put their paper and dividers into their 3-ring binder, sometimes we need to think about, does the student know how to put first a little pile of papers in and then a divider, put a pile of papers in and then a divider? An example that goes along with this given by a coworker was that her daughter just slipped the unopened package of paper and the unopened package of dividers right into the notebook. And when you think about it, she did put it into the notebook. So if the caregiver asks their student to shovel the driveway and put salt down, and the student has not shoveled the driveway before, has no idea where the snow shovel is or the salt, it may be just simply thinking about those things that we need to think about ahead of time and having ready. So that mental checklist or visual checklist for ourselves might help us with doing that, as well as just making sure that they have everything they need, they can access what they need, and they have the skills to perform that direction. So are the directions clear? This is where we get eliminating those distractions, such as electronics or playing with a sibling. Proximity is so important. I can't tell you how many times I have on occasion, I have given my teenager instructions from upstairs and they're downstairs. It just doesn't work out well. However, when I take time to go downstairs and provide those directions with her, looking at me and me being within close proximity, my directions are more likely to be followed. I typically will just hear an okay. Before giving your student the direction, make sure it's clear. So going back to that garbage example, if the caregiver says take out the trash and does not explain that the garbage needs to also go into the outside trash can and be brought to the end of the right side of the driveway for pickup, the garbage may not make it outside for pickup. In this instance, the caregiver can change their behavior to be sure to clarify what needs to happen and how. And being mindful of how many steps are needed to follow the directions really helps. It may be that we need to give directions one at a time to build fluency. You know your student best, and the caregiver may need to refer to some of those working memory strategies previously discussed to support those multiple step directions. Knowing the difference between a statement and a question is very important to supporting your student being able to follow a direction. Sometimes when we ask a question, we are giving our student permission to say no or yes. For example, saying, "Would you like to do your homework now?" opens up the opportunity for the student to say no. So rather, we want to reframe the direction as a statement that says, "It's time to do our homework," and move to our homework area. You can even pair this direction with a sticky note, again, for that start time and end time, or maybe the time that a break will be with a timer nearby. When we use statements, we're telling the student what we are expecting them to do, and caregivers should also be aware of the tone, volume, and body language as they are giving those directions as well. So some of our students need a little bit of processing time, a little bit of wait time after that instruction's been given. These extra moments allow them to think about the direction and begin the planning process for how to achieve it. However, when we're suggesting wait time, we don't mean 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes or more. We're looking at just an ample amount. Again, you know your student well enough to know how long they might need to just think about it for a second. And if you need to, count in your head as you eat, You might sing yourself the birthday song or the Jeopardy tune, and then know that after that, you're going to move to the next step, which is checking for understanding. So checking for understanding is an awesome strategy to learn directly from the student what they heard you say. So for example, we have an image on the right to represent this. Have your student repeat back what the direction was. This can sound like, so tell me in your own words what I asked you to do. Be sure to gently make those corrections if your student does not get it right. And it's important to pay attention to patterns of not remembering to see if written instructions or some kind of visual is needed to support that request. Sometimes when there's a lot of noise in the house, I might automatically just write the information down on a sticky note or checklist with the steps for my student to follow. This is also helpful sometimes because the student I'm speaking about at the moment is a little older, and it kind of takes away that piece of a possible power struggle. A visual is also helpful with clarifying the instructions to the steps. So this visual on the left of the screen sends the message to finish reading your book, clean up the toys you were just playing with. So this might be a cleanup type visual that you would be able to use repeatedly. Notice that the last step is a picture of someone who could be an older sibling providing feedback by doing that thumbs up and smiling. So last but not least is to praise and reinforce your student for following the direction. Remember, back to previous trainings when we talked about how important reinforcement is to teaching and learning. Remember to reinforce or praise for any attempt toward following the direction. It does not only need to be for the completion of the direction. That is, if your student needs it, immediately when the student begins to follow the direction, the caregiver could say, "Thanks for getting started right away." A gesture with a thumbs up or high five could be included while giving behavior-specific praise. By giving behavior-specific praise, your student knows exactly what it is that you're acknowledging and reinforcing. So a simple "good job" may not be enough. We need to specifically say what the good job was. A special activity, such as a game with a family member or access to something that is tangible, such as a new book or use of electronic advice, could also be used as a reinforcer. Now, we're not saying that every time a student follows directions that a special activity or game might be brought in, but there may be a specific plan depending on your student's needs for maybe the number of times that they follow direction, and when they meet that, then there might be something special. The ability to follow directions isn't the only piece of the puzzle, though. Instructional control, that's one of our behavior words, also plays a role in whether or not your student follows the directions given. So we're going to first complete a poll, and then Lori is going to take over and start talking about instructional control.
Okay, so that was a lot of information that Rachel shared with us this morning, and we're going to break it down into the first 3 strategies and then the second 3 strategies, just to allow us to process this information. So I'm going to share a poll in just a moment, and we want you to consider the first 3 goals or first 3 strategies that Rachel shared, and want to see where your priorities are with working with your student. So here's the poll. So if you're looking at the ability to perform the direction, whether or not the directions are clear, or whether or not we're posing something as a statement or a question to our student, which one of these is something you would like to establish as your goal to work on moving forward? And there's a place for you to take notes or to jot some ideas down on page 3 of your participant packet if you'd like to keep track of your plan. If you're not sure where to find your poll because it's not popping up on your screen, on the bottom where you see the circles of the silhouette of a person and the hand raising, to the right is a little image of a poll. You can click on that and it will open it up for you, just in case yours didn't pop up.
And just to share, the participant packet came in the email that went out from the Parent Resource Center. If you don't have it, you can use just some paper and pencil for now, and hopefully we can get that to you.
All right, so we see a lot of people responding. I'll share the responses. And really, there's no right or wrong answer. It's what works best for you and your student. And as you work through some of these strategies, you may see that you're able to have more success in one area, and then you want to maybe try something new. And this is always a work in progress. So in addition to the first 3, and I'll stop sharing this particular slide and end the poll, Rachel's now going to put up the second 3 topics that she talked about, which was processing time, checking for understanding, as well as praise and reinforcement. So thinking of those 3 areas, which one do you want to focus on with your student? All right, and Rachel just shared the results of the poll. And you might have noticed that during this activity that there are some strengths that your student has and are not areas that you necessarily need to focus on, but kind of check back in with your student. The whole point of this activity is just to help us identify some of those areas of need so that we can support our students develop the skills necessary to be able to more independently follow directions when given. And just keep in mind that progress is progress. Sometimes we progress quickly through things and sometimes it's slower, and either way it's okay. We're going to just support our students on this journey. Sometimes I feel like I need help with all 6, for sure. All right, as Rachel shared earlier, we're going to dive a little deeper into something called instructional control. Instructional control is really what motivates our students to listen to us or to be compliant and to do what we ask of them to do within a timely manner. We will know that instructional control is established when we can observe how often our students can follow our instructions. So the more instructions followed, the greater they have of instructional control. So we know that instructional control is established when our directions are being followed. So if the caregiver is observing that their student is following most of their instructions, instructional control is present. Those positive interactions between us, the caregiver, and our students will definitely help build that instructional control. Everything is always based in positive, healthy relationships. And so that is really the foundation of everything that we do on a daily basis, not only with our students, but with the people that are around us, whether it's work, other family members, or our friends. So in your participant guide on page 4, there is an area for you to take some notes on establishing instructional control. So you'll have this available to you as well in that packet. And listed here are some ways that we can build that instructional control with our student. So we want to be able to break that process down into much more manageable targets. So small steps allow for bigger successes. So our first step is to connect with our students over activities and events they enjoy in their day-to-day lives. Just as we said earlier, building those relationships with our students is going to be the foundation. And to do that, we want to be an active participant in those interactions and in those activities and events that they like. The next target is to establish and provide that reinforcement. They need to know that what they're doing is being observed and noticed and appreciated by us. So if you have joined us for any previous sessions, you know that reinforcement is extremely important when we are engaging with our students and want to increase expected behaviors. They need to know that what they're doing is what we're hoping or expecting them to do. And when we clearly teach our routines, procedures, and expectations and provide that feedback within the home environment, we are going to increase the likelihood of instructional control. The next target that we're going to develop trust with our students is through that consistency and follow through. We need to practice what we're preaching, for sure. And last but not least, we really want this to be a fun process. Enjoy the journey with your student and make it the most positive experience possible. Okay, so we're going to take a deeper look into what each of these targets look like and how you can apply it within your environment. So the first one that we're going to talk about is pairing. So we're going to connect ourselves or yourself to your learner's favorite items or activities, because this helps to build those positive relationships between the caregiver and your student. Sometimes it can be as small as just spending time together or playing a game of tag when the weather finally gets nice like it has been for the last couple of days, or play a game like Monopoly or telling jokes. It's really whatever brings the two of you together and makes that connection. The student needs to know that you, the caregiver, are not just the adult in that environment providing instructions, but that you also can be that source of joy and fun. And when the caregiver interacts with the student during those preferred activities and with those favorite items, the student then gets that reinforcement that the caregiver is around and that good things can happen, not just having to follow the instructions that are always given. So part of instructional control is that the student understands that the caregiver is the one who is the provider of those favorite items or activities. And sometimes they're not just available for free, they actually need to be tied to or paired to an expectation or a direction that is given. So that sounds great, but how do we establish and provide these reinforcers, this feedback to our students so that we can encourage the directions to be followed on a more consistent basis? So establishing reinforcers by observing what your student likes or even asking your student about preferences is one way to encourage the continuation of following those directions. So we want to establish those reinforcers. This is extremely important because the reinforcer actually needs to be reinforcing. It needs to be something that the student wants, and it needs to be something that they will receive. So reinforcers should also vary as much as possible, because some of our students do get bored with being provided that same reinforcer over and over again. And so sometimes offering some choice in a reinforcer can be really helpful. Now, for some of our students, they do like the same thing over and over. So you know your student best, and providing the reinforcer that motivates them the most is really what's most important. Providing reinforcement needs to be contingent or tied to them completing the direction that you're requesting them to follow. So our goal is to have the reinforcer within the caregiver's possession so that it can be given to the student as soon as that direction is followed. We want the student to be able to see the caregiver as a way to access that reinforcement. So if you give a direction to your child and it's followed, we need to immediately provide that reinforcement in the form of either praise or some other pre-established reinforcer. So building on these strategies, our next important step in the process is to think about what those routines, procedures, and expectations we have or maybe have not established yet within our home environment. And having these steps in place is also going to help support students following directions. So let's connect the importance of routines, procedures, and expectations to following directions. So as we begin our discussion on the differences between the three, it is important to keep in mind that we should keep routines, procedures, and expectations simple. Keeping them as simple as possible is going to encourage a successful experience. Simplicity also helps to aid the comprehension or understanding and retention of given directions and expectations. Earlier, Rachel talked about whether or not following directions could be a sign of our students having some working memory challenges. And so this can help work on those challenges or build those skills needed to help working memory by keeping it simple, clear, and concise. Okay, so we are going to have another activity now through the use of a poll. So this is so me. How many of you have started diets or started exercising, which is what I was doing January 1st, and we're super into the routine, and then inevitably something happens where our routine just stops and we're back to eating either the full sleeve of Oreos, or really the only exercise that's happening now is going from my computer to the kitchen to grab some snack and then back to my computer. Anybody have that same problem where they try to start something and we're excited about it, and then something happened to break that routine, and now we're kind of sliding back to our old habits? That is me. You can use your agree or disagree button. I do see some people already doing that. I appreciate that. And that's what happens. For a lot of us, establishing and maintaining a routine is going to have a similar pattern in that we might have a meal plan that has our house running smoothly, and then something happens. Either I come home late from work, or someone is sick, or there's an argument with one of our children, or I didn't sleep well the night before, and bam, the next thing we know, we're compromising on the rules, and then we find ourselves just looking at this steep hill to get back to where we once were. And if I ask you all to think about what throws you off track, and you're thinking, I'm not sure, I do invite you to think about what that thing is over the next couple of weeks, because knowing what knocks us off course is important so that we can plan and prepare for that and then respond differently for the next time. It's kind of like our plan A is doing what we want to do, and we have that plan, waking up early, exercising, eating healthy, and then my plan B, when I don't sleep well at night and I'm tired and I just want to sleep in the morning, well, what is my alternate option so that I can still follow through on my new healthier routine? So we want to make sure that we do have those options. And it sounds very simple, but it's not. It definitely takes a lot of practice and hard work to make the routines become our habits. And just because it doesn't happen the first time or the second time or maybe even the third time, it's okay. We're thinking about and reflecting on how we can make this better. We, again, are moving our process in the right direction. All right, moving into our routines, we're going to think about the big picture first. So our routines are those to-dos, right? The bigger umbrella. So you probably have a lot of routines in your house that you may not even recognize at this point that they are a routine. They just kind of exist. It could be your morning routine. Do you do the same thing when you wake up every morning? Do you get up? Do you go brush your teeth? Do you get dressed, go eat breakfast? Or do you mix up the order in which you do things? Do you come home from work and have your routine there? Even when you come inside from being outside, do you have a routine? There are so many routines that we follow or create in our homes on a daily basis that it might take a moment to even just think about what some of those are. And embedded in those routines are our procedures. So the procedures are really how we want to get those things done. So your dinner time routine might be that you eat dinner and then you excuse yourself from the table and then you put your dishes in the sink. But that's really not everything that happens. It gets broken down even further, and those are the procedures. So for some people, when they say they put their dishes in the sink, it might mean that they rinse off the plate, pile it in the sink, and then put the dishes into the dishwasher when they're clean, or at least wiped down. Other people, your procedure for the routine of dinner time might be that you get up, you take your plate, and you put it right, you open the dishwasher and you put it right in the dishwasher. And that's fine. It's whatever works for your family. The steps within the routine, those are the procedures. And sometimes they're not always so clear. I know in my home, I have teenagers, and I am still struggling with having my teenagers follow our procedures because they get up from dinner, and sometimes they'll get their dishes into the dishwasher, and sometimes if they see something in the sink, they assume the dishwasher is running, and then they just put everything in the sink. They still haven't gotten to the point of looking to see if the dishwasher is clean or dirty and then helping out. So we actually started writing it down. These are the steps to help clarify those procedures. So everybody's experiences with procedures are unique, and it's really that you're clear about what your procedures are, and that you help your students be consistent with what those expectations are, which is what we're going to talk about next. So our expectations are what you think your students should do. If we're not clear about our expectations, then our students are going to kind of form their own expectations based on the information that they have. So for example, if you want your students to use a low voice when inside your home right now because other people are either working or siblings are also in school, we need to let them know that so that it's very clear what those expectations are. When we have strong routines and procedures, they help set those expectations because it lets our students know what they should be doing and how they should be doing it. Expectations can also sometimes interchangeably be called rules because they are pretty much the rules of the home. So the important thing to keep in mind is that as our students grow, those expectations might change. So when our students are younger, maybe having the plate go into the sink is perfectly fine. But as they get older, maybe you want them now to not only clean their own plate and put it into the dishwasher, but if there's anything else in the sink, it also needs to go in the dishwasher. That would be something that maybe a younger child would not have the expectation of doing. So we can't anticipate every situation that comes up. So it's just an evolving process on teaching those expectations. So the point is, sometimes our students don't know our expectations, and we will recognize that because they're not doing what we're asking them to do correctly. And so we have to take that responsibility and clarify it for them. So our rules or expectations that are already known need to be followed. And when this happens, when they actually follow what we're asking them to do, they have established that instructional control. So at this point, you might be saying, but my students should just know what to do at this point, or why can't they be independent? And you're right, it can be frustrating when we ask our students to do the same thing one day to the next and it's still not working. That's our red flag that maybe we need to either teach it to them in a different way or break down those tasks a little bit more. So no matter where you are in your journey with establishing and strengthening those students' independent skills, there might be something for us to walk away with from this training. And it might be that we look at what is happening and say, what are we missing in teaching our students to follow directions? So if they haven't mastered what they're supposed to do, it might be that we're not necessarily teaching it to them in a way that's working for them. In addition, our consistency and follow-through is key in having our students follow directions. So let's take another look at our next slide to talk about the importance of consistency and follow-through. So we talked about building relationships and the importance of those positive relationships with our students. And a lot of that will also create this feeling of trust as we build those relationships. And that will come when we are also consistent and we follow through with what we say we're going to do or what we expect our students to do while we support them. So if we have clear routines, procedures, and expectations, we will pave the road for our students to go down to help with them being successful in following our directions. So our caregivers, us, show that our students, we show them that we can be trusted when we do what we say on a consistent basis. So the more consistent we are in what we do, the more believable we are to our students. And if we give a direction and don't check to see if it's been followed, then our students might not necessarily know that it was that important for us to have that direction followed. So we really want to make sure that we provide that reinforcement, that we allow them to know that what we say is what those expectations are, to follow the direction, and then we're going to reinforce, whether it's through praise or something else that has been pre-established afterwards, to show the consistency of us supporting them through that process. As we just mentioned earlier, we really want to make sure, though, that we provide the student with easy directions as often as possible. We want them to feel successful in what we're asking them to do, because that allows them to push themselves a little bit further the next time if it's a little more challenging. So directions that they have been successful with in the past build that momentum of success. And again, it also continues to build that positive relationship between the caregiver and the student. Additionally, if a reinforcement plan has been set up, let's say you say, if you make your bed for 5 days in a week, then we can spend some time together. We can paint each other's nails or watch that show that we wanted to watch together. We need to make sure we honor that agreement. So if we agreed that we're going to watch that show, then we better clear our calendars and make sure we find that time to do it. It's imperative for that trust to be developed and that we follow through on our agreement. In addition, this is life, right? Sometimes changes happen, surprises happen on a daily basis. So for example, if we have established our routine as at 4 o'clock, from 4 to 4:30, you're going to do homework every night, but today you have a doctor's appointment, we want to make sure we allow our students to process the change in our routine so that they are able to have that plan B occur successfully. So by giving our students a heads up on those upcoming changes, we're openly communicating with them and preparing them for that change in routine, which for some of our students can be really difficult. I would say even writing it down using a paper calendar, or we have a whiteboard in my kitchen where major changes in our daily routines we document there. My husband and I document there for our children, because visually they need to see it and have time to plan ahead to know that those changes are coming in order to avoid meltdowns. So if your student is similar to mine, having those visuals that Rachel shared earlier in our presentation would be really helpful. We also need to admit to our students when things are not consistent or we don't follow through or our students don't follow through. So for example, if I didn't have a chance to check on my student whether or not they cleaned their room because I got pulled to help with a work meeting, or I found out that my other child wasn't feeling well and I had to take care of them, I would definitely let my student know that the expectation was that you were to clean your room. That didn't happen. And so your friend is coming to the house. Next time, this is what the expectations are, okay? You can let them know that you feel disappointed that that happened and that sometimes our schedules don't allow for us to always check, and that you'll try to be more consistent, but that we both need to hold up both ends of our agreement. Finally, we want to make sure that we have fun with this. This should not always be such a chore for you. And it doesn't always feel so fun when there's so much to get done, as well as just competing factors in our lives. So just taking a short moment to step away from work, from your chores, or something that your phone, something that is taking up your time to interact with your student is absolutely well worth that time. I know I am often guilty of getting caught up with working to get things done. And sometimes that is at a disadvantage to my relationship with my daughter or my son, and to those expectations and directions that I'm trying to establish within our home. So even though I have 2 teenagers and they're fairly independent, and most times the directions are followed, there are times when they're not. And so there are times where I need to make the effort to chat with my daughter about her life, just connecting with her, do something with her, so that she knows that my job in life is not always just to tell her what to do, but that I can also be there to have fun with her, to engage with her, and to support her. So even though directions are being given, we need to make those interactions positive with our students. And the more positive experiences we have together, hopefully the easier it will be to follow your directions. That in itself can be reinforcing. So when reinforcement is provided for following the directions, you can be part of that reinforcement, part of that fun activity, or that hug or that high five that the student receives from you for completing that task. And by following more directions and having fun at the same time, they're going to want to share more of those experiences with us and receive that positive praise from us. So as we come to the wrap up of our time together today, we just want to do one last check-in before we get to our question and answer, because we have presented you with a tremendous amount of information. Keep in mind, we keep saying this, but it's true. This is a process, and it takes time to establish that instructional control and to see a more frequent opportunity for our students to follow those directions at home more independently. And if you want to work on the 2 things you listed in your participant guide from our earlier polls, that's a great place to start. Or if there's something else in this area of instructional control that you want to focus on, of course, that's fine too. So using your agree and disagree buttons, we just want to hear from you as to whether or not that you feel like you are walking away with some strategies that you are excited about exploring further with your student. And if not, it's okay. If you're still processing all of this information and you're not sure where to start yet, we hear you and we completely understand. Hopefully you'll take some time either later today or later in this week to review some of this information and come up with a plan that works for your family. So based on that, who agrees? I see a bunch of agrees, which is so nice, and some smiley faces, which is wonderful. On who feels like they're walking away with some helpful tips and tools to help our students more regularly follow through on directions. Thank you so much for participating in that poll. So finally, as our take-home message, kind of our summary for today, we just are hopeful that we've been able to share the importance that behavior is a form of communication and that executive functions play a role in changing our students' behavior, sometimes even in our own behavior, and that following directions is a little more complex than we might have thought. We're hoping that you'll be able to utilize the 6 strategies for increasing following directions, and that there's an understanding of instructional control, and that it can be established through pairing, reinforcement, clear expectations, and consistency. And please remember to have fun. Thank you so much for your time this morning. We want to thank the Parent Resource Center for their partnership as always, and we want to thank your partnership as well with us. We're so happy that you were able to join us, and we look forward to seeing you at our next training, which is scheduled for March 18th, and the topic is effectively communicating with your students at home, where we'll be talking about an overview of the components of communication and share strategies to increase effective communication with your students. So we are at that point, I think, where we are able to open up, and well, the chat is obviously open, and answer any questions that you may have
Well, first,
regarding
thank you.
following directions.
Thank you,
Thank you.
ladies. It was fabulous. The first question is, I appreciate the dialogue examples. Do you have a good example for taking a shower?
I would say using, I mean, you can certainly use visuals for that because it is a step-by-step process, and it might be that before the student actually takes a shower, you can take a picture. I mean, obviously you're dressed, right? But you can take a picture of your student getting what they need, like go get the towel, get your clothes, take a picture of what's in the shower. Where is the soap? Where is the shampoo? And have them have that step-by-step visual of what the expectations are. The other option is to potentially write a social story, which is a story of your student going through the steps of taking a shower. And I know that the Parent Resource Center has a lot of resources on how to write social stories, and we've done some trainings on that as well. So those might be two ways in which you can help your student. Rachel, any other suggestions?
I'm right along with you. I think that if the question is about the steps to taking a shower, what do you do, when you're in the shower so you're more independent? I think that would be great to have a visual, and of course, probably laminate it. But yeah, great idea. Social story.
Yeah. Sorry, Rachel. I was just thinking when you said laminated, you can even kind of tie it to the outside of the shower door or put it, on the far wall of a bathtub shower for that student to access. That was a great idea.
Would be great.
Yes.
So here's another question. My child freaks out when I use timers and tell her how much time she has to do something. Any suggestions on how to deal with that, or is it just that method is just not going to work with my child?
Not everything that we share is going to work with every student, and I'm glad you brought that up. And there are a lot of our students where timers or that constraint of the time is actually a trigger for them. So you're right, that is a strategy that you probably at this point in their developmental process would not work for them. And it might be, depending on their age, having a conversation with them about what does work for them. Bring them into that conversation, into the decision making, because then it allows some ownership of whatever that final decision is. And then if it doesn't work for the student, then we can say, listen, this was your suggestion. I'm sorry it didn't work. Let's see if we can come up with some other options. But you're right, timers sometimes don't work for some of our students where they kind of perseverate on the timer and not on the task. And so we do need to provide some other options for them. And it might be that you become the timer. You have 5 more minutes, you have 2 more minutes, if that works better for them. Or maybe it's an if then or a when then. When you complete this, then you have access to something else. So those are some other choices.
Okay. Next question. How should I communicate with my teen when he or she is showing no interest in school things or reading books, but hot topic of the day, electronic games?
Yeah, this comes up at, I think, every training that we do, right? I mean, and it's interesting. I actually just met with my son's counselor yesterday, and she told me that they polled the high school students, and I can't imagine it's much different for any of the other students. And she said approximately 70% of the students that they polled answered for the question, what do you do to help yourself like self-regulate and to get yourself to feel better? They said some sort of like gaming or form of electronics. And I think in our current situation in the pandemic, it has become even a bigger hot topic because it's the social piece too right now for our students. So for some parents, it might be that you have to turn your Wi-Fi off. It might be that they use timers where they have a schedule when they're allowed to be on and be off, because when they're on for a really extended period of time, and I'm battling this in my house too, it does change the chemicals in the brain. And so they almost have it's almost like they have to detox afterwards, after being on for so long, and get back to their own baseline so they can really process stuff. So know that this is not a challenge you're facing by yourself, but this is something we're all facing, especially now during this pandemic. That didn't probably answer your question. It was really more of a parent connection to you. Rachel, any other suggestions on that?
No, I think you covered that one, Lori.
Okay, I need ideas for a male teenager to follow directions promptly. He seems to drag his feet and procrastinates.
So again, I mean, for each student, this is going to be individual. So thinking about if he's dragging his feet and procrastinating, what is he doing instead? I think we need to kind of think about that. And it could be that, he may have access to something that's more fun than following that direction, but just kind of being a detective and trying to look at what the why might be about that. And it could even be related to, I'm not sure if you're talking about academics, so just thinking about what that task is and going through some of this presentation, and is there a need to clarify? Is there a need for some sort of reinforcement? Is there a need for a visual of those steps? And it may just be that we don't prefer doing whatever it is that the parent has asked, which is, that happens often. And we need to kind of think about what are they doing instead, because if that thing that they're doing instead is more reinforcing, we may need to look at that situation.
Okay, next question. What strategies do you have for teens to engage to follow directions if they don't want to talk to you?
Well, so how are they communicating with you? Can you leave notes for them? Can you text them? Can you have a family meeting to talk about those expectations? And if you are concerned about a disconnect between your student and yourself, you can always reach out to the Parent Resource Center for additional resources on that. Sometimes we do need to meet our students where they are, because high schoolers definitely, don't think we're so cool anymore. And so we might need to try to communicate with them in a way that works for them. But if you are concerned about either a deeper problem or really need some other ways to brainstorm how to communicate best, which is our next topic for March 18th, that would definitely be something that I would encourage you to attend, or to reach out to the Parent Resource Center to get some more specific individualized supports for that. Again, Rachel, anything to add to that?
Well, again, it's difficult when you're not able to observe it. We aren't. But I thought the first thing I thought of, Lori, was maybe going back to the pairing section that you went over and looking at some ways. I think that I can kind of relate sometimes to this question, because we are so busy in our household, and there is so much going on with sports and things like that, that we're just kind of going. And so I have to be super aware of making those connections and doing that pairing, and not just being the person that's keeping us structured and making sure we're on time to places and that things are getting finished. So, just that was kind of the first thing that I thought of was, and we had talked about that. We're not just the people who give directions, even though we may be perceived that way sometimes, but we also can have fun and connect.
I love that. And I think also keep in mind the fun piece, right? Like you just said, we're not always the person to give the directions. Build in some time with your child to do something other than requesting them to follow through on a direction. If they are in whatever they're interested in, maybe take an interest in that and try to engage in some sort of their conversation with them, or encourage them to show something to you, whether it's a game that they're playing or a sport that they love, and start kind of building that foundation back up again, meeting them where they are.
How should I make my 9-year-old think, understand that there are things that are private and stay home, and things that can be out in the world? I think this parent is having trouble communicating with her child about private versus public, and what's safe and what's not safe.
The first thing I'm thinking of is a social story, perhaps, and that is you could create it yourself, of what things we talk about outside and what's private and what's not private, and just kind of providing that visual and going over that regularly with the student. I think that sometimes these things can happen in the moment, though, as well. You can't always anticipate. But I think just continuing with that teaching, not just in the moment or immediately after saying, oh, we don't talk about that, that's private, but ahead of time at kind of at home at that baseline stage, maybe having some stories, maybe creating a colorful PowerPoint, things like that, to use as a book to review that. Lori, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that's perfect. And there are probably some children's books out there that would also reinforce that would have those pretty illustrations. And then you can almost create your own. The social story could be based off of that, so that it's more personalized to what you would like to keep private and what you think is appropriate to share, for sure.
2 more questions. Based on your experience, what is bad about not being consistent with your rules? So I guess discussing what are the effects of inconsistency.
Do you want to take that, Rachel?
Well, I sure, we can both answer this. I think that when our students see that we aren't consistent, then their behavior isn't consistent. And so if we are, our topic today is following those directions, if we're looking for following directions, we need to kind of go back to making sure that if we give a direction, there's follow through, because if they see that we're not following through, they're not going to see a reason to follow the direction. If this is what your question was about, I'm hoping that I'm understanding. Lori, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would agree. I think we all default back to what we're comfortable doing. And if we make our own rules, then they may not meet your expectations. And what we know about children is they actually want to know, even though they push that ceiling, they want to know where that ceiling is. It's a sense of safety and security for them. And so by being consistent on our end provides those boundaries for them and a sense of safety and security for them. That doesn't mean you can't be flexible on certain things, but for many of those routines, procedures, and expectations, being consistent allows them to kind of function within your environment in a healthier way.
We have one more question and then we'll wrap it up for the day. What are some tips on how to get a 9-year-old boy to stop and follow directions? For example, we ask him to do something, put away his shoes, and he continues to move towards whatever activity he wants to do. Still occurs even when we ask him to stop and look at us to ensure that he hears us. still won't stop?
I would say, so I probably would need more information here, but what I heard was he's moving towards what he wants and he doesn't stop. So my question, or actually what I'd like to point out is, if he is, what we know about behavior is if it's reinforced, it will increase over time. So if he is heading towards that thing that he wants and he does get access to it, then that behavior of not listening, right, or not following that direction could be being reinforced over time. But again, I would need to know a little more about the situation. Lori?
Now, I would have said the exact same thing. I think if you then start to intervene and deny access to that preferred item to try to reshape the behavior, just know that you might see a spike in a behavior that you may not necessarily want because they are pushing back. And sometimes that's, as long as they're safe, sometimes that's what's going to happen. So that, again, that consistency of you denying access, so that they have to first do what the directions were before they get access to that preferred activity occurs. It's going to take some time, and they may push back. And that's just how we reshape behavior. But just like Rachel said, if they are continually getting access to what they want, then their behavior is just being reinforced that it's okay to do that. But again, not knowing the whole situation, that's just a very kind of broad answer.
Well, thank you, ladies. This has been very informative. We hope to see everybody at the 7th installment of the Behavior Intervention Series. I hope everybody has a great afternoon.